So hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. We are starting a new webinar series on charting career paths as an early career scientist. And today is our first webinar in this new series. So it's going to be on charting a career path in the academic sector. And we have 4 speakers today. And I will present them in a minute. So before we start, I want to go through the code of conduct. So when we have any webinars, we will ask you to follow this this code of conduct. So please be polite and respectful to the speakers and all participants. Please type your questions in the chat box first. Do not open your microphone. The speaker will reply to them during the Q&A session, and let you know that we will record all contents in the presentation and messages in the chat box. So I'm going to briefly go through the webinar structure. We're going to have 4 thematic sessions, going through how to navigate the job search, crafting a CV, and building a professional network, where each speaker will talk around 10 minutes. Then we will have a panel discussion in which the speakers will discuss some of the questions that the attendees left in the registration form or that come up in the chat box. And finally, we will have a breakout session where the audience will have the opportunity to have a dialogue with the speakers, which will be a 30-minute session, and we will have 2 speakers per session. We will explain the details of this when we reach this point. So I'm going to present our speakers. Shipra Jan, we're missing an I there, sorry, is going to talk about job searching, how and where to do this job search. Shipra is a climate scientist and a former YES executive committee member. Gerbrand Koren is an associate professor at Utrecht University, and he works on quantification and better understanding of CO2 exchange between the atmosphere and vegetation. Marisol, and he is an current executive committee member serving for the YES community. Marisol Osman is a climate scientist working on subseasonal to seasonal variability and forecasting at the Department of Troposphere Research in the Institute of Meteorology and Climate at KIT in Germany. And is former executive committee member for YES. And Faten Attig Bahar is an expert in renewable energy technologies and implementation, and is a current YES executive committee member. So I'll leave you with them, and we will start with Shipra. So Shipra, the floor is all yours. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and you can share yours.
Thanks, Julia. So hi, everyone. As Julia already mentioned, I am Shipra Jan, and I am currently based in Singapore. And my main area of research is climate services at the moment. So today, I hope you can see my screen now before I just dive into my...
Yes, perfect.
Perfect. Okay. So I'll be covering about the job hunting aspect of this webinar series, and most of the experience is in the operations sector or also in academia. So unfortunately, in this webinar, I'll talk mostly about job hunting in academia, but like Julia said, there are more seminars coming where you can gain more insights about the industry as well. Just going right into the presentation. So in my experience, so maybe I can briefly talk first about my experience in the academia so far. I have been working in this field for almost 10 years now. I worked at 5 different organizations, so almost an average of 2 years per organization. But mainly I worked on the contractual positions from postdoc to a project manager or sometimes research associate. Currently, I'm based in Singapore in a more stable working environment. So a lot of my advice maybe is coming from my past experience and the peculiarities that I have faced in my career. So for the job hunting, I think this is my first and perhaps the most important advice, that it's just using the subscribe button, which you can find on the website. So for the jobs in academia, there are many mailing lists, for example, MedJobs, and I found 2 of my last jobs actually at MedJobs, ES Jobs, Earthworks, ECRs. All of these are subscribable, and it's quite easy to navigate through. So I would suggest for the job search, probably exploring these mailing lists. There are also portals which are run by journals, for example, Nature and Science, as well as societies like American Geophysical Union, EGU. And recently I also saw a job portal on Mendeley. And again, all of these have an option to subscribe to their newsletter or the job search engine. There are professional networking platforms, LinkedIn, Indeed, Devnet, Glassdoor, jobs.ac.uk. So LinkedIn and jobs.ac.uk is a little bit more. So LinkedIn is actually both. You can see the academic as well as the industrial jobs being posted there. Jobs.ac.uk is primarily focused on the academic jobs. So these are also the alternate platforms that probably could help you in the job search. And if you have a wish list of the universities where you would like to work, maybe it's also worth going on their websites. So these days, most of the universities and institutes have on their website this button or this page, which is sometimes titled as vacancies, jobs, or work with us. And I did some research to see that, okay, if this exists, and in my experience, at least at the website that I explored in a short amount of time before this seminar, I found that most of the universities these days have these. So my first and foremost advice is, even if you're not looking for a job at the moment, it's useful to subscribe and keep yourself abreast on what are the departments or universities are there which match your profile. And so these are like one way to find a job in the academy and navigate academia, and these are more conventional sources. So I'm going to mention about a little bit non-conventional sources in my next slide. But before we go there, I think it's also important to mention that when you start looking for a job, don't wait until your contract expires. So that will put you in a very, very vulnerable position. I usually start at least 3 months, sometimes even 6 months in advance. If I start 6 months, I may not be like proactively looking, but I keep an eye out what is out there. Another thing that I've personally benefited from so far is by letting people know that you are looking for a job. So whenever I wish to have a change in job or my contract was expiring, I would mail by my collaborators and sometimes my colleagues as well to let them know that I would be looking for a job in the near term. So I would drop maybe like not a very formal email, a semi-formal email saying that, hi, my contract is about to expire in a few months' time. Here is my CV. If you see something where I could fit, can you please send me? So I've done that in past multiple times, and you would be surprised that so many people actually are rooting for you. So my collaborators have colleagues have actually sent me the jobs they saw on internet, or sometimes in their departments with their colleague, the posts are advertised. So I have received recommendations from many people in the past. And it's always good to have more eyes, not just your eyes, but other people's eyes also looking out for you. So please don't hesitate to do that if you are looking for a job change. Or I also like, I think it's also important, and it's perhaps not emphasized enough, the importance of craft and effective email when you're looking for job search. So when you send out these emails to your collaborator colleagues, it's good to be short, punchy, to the point. Some of the references, maybe I can share more references that I have followed in my career, but I particularly like this article. It's essentially for finding a PhD, but the advice that the author has shared on this in this article on the right, I thought that that's quite generic and could be extended for the job search as well. So, and there are many, many more advices on the Nature Career column, and I think I also remember following a podcast series on Science Career column where they discussed how to navigate or how to job hunt in academia, how to write emails, how to approach the employers. And so this slide, actually, I was a bit skeptical if it should be there or not, because these are like more like a personal experiences and reflections. Some things that worked for me, I'm not quite sure if it worked for everyone, but perhaps it's worth sharing. So in my last about like decade of experience, I have realized that there are sometimes positions that are not advertised. So I have two successful examples from this. So in when I was working in an operational center in India, my project lost funding and I had to change jobs rather in a very short time frame. So I started writing to the people who are working in the research institute or the universities in India. So I wrote to one professor, and then they had the grant, but due to some reason, they were not able to advertise the position. So sometimes they have a limited grant for like 1 year, and the admin that is involved to fill that position may be too much for them or they're too busy. And the second time that this worked for me, I met someone in Japan in a conference, and then I think 3 years later, I wrote to that person if they have a position with them. So I don't know if it was a streak of luck, but that professor's postdoc just left their job about like 1 month ago. And they were not very proactively looking for somebody to fill the position, but they offered me a visiting researcher's position with the budget they have. So if you feel that, okay, you have a very short time frame and you cannot wait for the right position to come by, I would strongly encourage to approach the people that you know or people whose work you like in your research area, to check with them if they have an open position in their department, in their group, or maybe in their colleagues group. And I don't think you have to feel shy at all about this. Another personal reflection, so when I apply for a job, too often I get this feeling that I'm applying quite recklessly, and I also get rejected a lot. So I think a few years before I started keeping a track of where I'm applying, and I also have a column next to it whether I was accepted for this position, to which stage I reached, and why I was not selected. So even after, like, whenever I feel that, okay, now I need a job change or my contract is going to end, I'll go back to the table to reflect, okay, maybe these are the things that didn't work for me in the past. Maybe it's the CV, maybe the recommendations were not that strong, or maybe my research tag was not convincing. So it also will help you to reflect on the reasons or why your application was not successful, and maybe to better next time. At least it'll help me with that. And I also felt more positive because I felt that I'm applying to hundreds of positions and nothing is working out. But when I maintained that table and I realized I'm not applying to that many actually, and my success rate was not that bad. So it also helps you to raise self-confidence if you keep a track of the applications that you put in. And the third one that I also didn't know when I was a fresh PhD graduate, that you can also find jobs in conferences. So, for example, the Japan's position worked out because I met the professor multiple times, maybe I think 2 times, once in EGU and once in Sport in Korea. So sometimes when you go to the conferences, if somebody likes your work, they also offer positions to you. I've also met my current employers in past conferences and vice versa as well. So I would suggest, even though it's an online conference, it's good to maintain some presence and let the community know that you are here. And the third most unconventional thing that I found recently is the social media. So I'm quite new to Twitter. I joined a couple of years ago, but I'm not that active. But I found that Twitter is quite actually useful. So I have started following the universities and job portals. So most of the universities, I am not sure about all parts of the world. So what I checked was for the Europe, UK, and probably for the Asia. So the universities have a separate Twitter handle for their department, which handles the recruitment. So it's good to find out what the Twitter handle is and follow them, because I think that most of the jobs that are posted on the website, which you might miss, are posted on Twitter as well.
Shipra, just to let you know that 10 minutes has passed.
Okay, so this is my last slide. So since we are on the topic of jobs, I wanted to highlight some of the open positions we have currently at the CCRS. And I will post this link in the chat. So if you're interested in any of these positions, please feel free to mail me or mail the HR or any of the scientists working in CCRS to have more information on these posts. Thank you.
Thank you, Shipra. So now we will continue with Gerbrand.
So yeah, thanks a lot for giving me the opportunity to speak here, Julia, and thank you all for attending. It's a great honor to speak to you. So in the next 10 minutes, or maybe a little bit less, I will talk about becoming an independent researcher, at least my view on that. And I will start first talking about my own background to put things also a little bit into perspective, like, my own experience, basically. So here's a very short summary. I've done a master's in applied physics at Delft University in the Netherlands. And then after that, I did not include it here, but after that, after completing my master thesis, I went into industry and I worked for a company a couple of years. This was a very good experience for me, and I think I have actually benefited a lot from that, from being away from the academic world for a couple of years. Then at some point I realized that it was a bit repetitive, the work in industry, at least that was my feeling, and I wanted to do something else. And I started the PhD in Wageningen University, and I finished that in 2020. Then I did a very short postdoc, which was supposed to be a very nice postdoc with a lot of international travel to the US and between the US and Europe, but then COVID came. So that was a lot of Zoom calls, which was not really what I was expecting or hoping for. So then I changed jobs and took on a job as assistant professor in Utrecht University, which is where I'm currently still at. So now it's a lot of, basically my work now is 50% research and 50% teaching. And to be very brief about my own research interests, so I'm looking at exchange of carbon dioxide between atmosphere and biosphere, so uptake through photosynthesis and release through respiration. This is what I'm interested in. Impacts of extreme weather events like droughts, heat waves, floods, things like that. And to understand this, or to model this, quantify this, I'm using models, satellites, isotopes. So these are, let's say, the tools that I'm using in my research. Just to get a little bit information about my disciplinary background. And these are then a couple of slides or a couple of tips that I think are helpful in becoming an independent researcher. And I think they could help accelerate or improve, or how can I say that? accelerate perhaps your scientific career. So first, I have one slide about communication, because I think that that's really important, communication, because in science, Shipra already spoke about conferences and what that meant for her, that she was able to travel to conferences, talk to people and interact, and ultimately this landed her jobs or multiple jobs or opportunities at least. So I think that really communication is key in science. And here are just a couple of things that I think are very important. So from my own perspective, also what I now see from my students. So first of all, I think it's very good to be very specific in communications with senior staff or staff in general. So short email messages with a clear question, for instance. So sometimes I get a message that's very long and then I don't really answer it, or I forget about it, or it's very vague or very polite, not really to the point. So this is, I think, a strength. If you can really be very concise in your communication. This is also true for application letters. If you apply for a position like a PhD, a postdoc, or anything else, I think it's very helpful if you can, it's not the case that a longer letter is a better letter. That's what I'm trying to say. Sometimes I was just reviewing a lot of letters that we received for a position, and then you really appreciate it if someone can really be to the point and say what's important. And you also recognize this really as a quality in a candidate. So when I hire someone, I also look closely at the structure of the motivation letter. This will tell if someone is able to write well. Yeah, so I mean, in science, writing is like, maybe the most important. I mean, of course, we are now talking and we sometimes presenting a poster or another talk, but writing is so important in science still. Maybe it's a little bit old-fashioned, but we write a lot of papers. So the structure of writing is really important. And I think when you get, especially like motivation letters, are often quite hard to structure because you try to explain why you want a certain position. And sometimes I see repetition in it, or I don't see the clear structure. I think it's harder to write maybe a motivation letter than a scientific paper. But still, if you receive a motivation letter and you see that the structure is not clear, then you already start to doubt, like, could this person really write good papers maybe, or does this person need a lot of help for that? So that's just one tip, to spend a lot of time on the structure. Finally, to use terminology that's used in the field, but be cautious of not being too superficial in the use of buzzwords. This is also stemming a little bit from my recent experience in job interviews, that I think we interviewed a couple of persons. Some of them were really relying a lot on the buzzwords that were used in their own discipline. And this made us question whether these candidates were able to transition to the new field. And some other people were really trying to use some buzzwords that are used in let's say, in my field. But then in many cases, it was so superficial that it didn't come across really well. So just be aware of the terminology that you use in these conversations is a tip. So my final slide already, so I think I'm quite brief here, about becoming an independent researcher. So I think these are really, for me, these things that I wrote down here really worked well. So first of all, get involved in external activities outside your own lab environment, your own group, but just go somewhere else. And I think a great place could be one of the YES working groups. So any other working group could also be fine, but especially I think what's nice about YES is that it's it's also with early career researchers. So let's say it's sort of a safe environment where people are there to help you out, and they are probably in a similar position, and they understand the struggles that you might have. And I think it's a great way to start collaborating internationally. This, speaking for myself, this really helped me a lot. Then a second tip about becoming an independent researcher is go alone to a meeting or conference. So what I see a lot in my own university is that people, when they go to this conference, the first thing they do is open a WhatsApp group, and they join everyone from the department that goes to the same meeting, gets added to the group, and they go by train or by plane together, and they book one hotel or Airbnb, and like they're just, I mean, I'm sure they have fun, but it's more like they could also just stay in our department and then communicate there. So I think what helped me is to go alone, because it really forces you to you know, to start this sort of a little bit uncomfortable conversation to someone you don't know. For me, it really helps to go alone. If I don't go alone, but with someone I know very well, then you sort of sit next to that person and you talk a lot with that person. So this is just something that really helped me a lot to go alone to meetings. Look at the criteria on which your next career step is evaluated. So yeah, it sounds maybe a bit vague or abstract, but yeah, I think it helped me a lot that people, when I was doing my PhD, often people thought that I was doing a postdoc because I was trying to work, let's say, as a postdoc. And I think it's also sometimes very small investments that you make early in your career can really pay out. Like maybe starting a small collaboration. This usually takes years before something really comes out of it. But if you start with it now and it's just like a low investment, then that could be something that could really pay out well ultimately in your career. Also, it can actually, besides making scientific or career-wise progress, let's say, I mean, you can focus a lot on that. This is a bit how I'm telling it now to you, but it can also be a way to relieve the pressure. If you know that you are already performing on a very good level, it doesn't only mean that maybe you will progress very fast, but it also means that you don't have to stress. You don't have to stress too much about, am I doing well right now in this position that I'm at right now? So I think that's also good. And finally, my last, let's say, comment or suggestion or tip to you would be, do what gives you energy, also if it is an unusual path. So speaking for myself, when I completed my master's, I did have some interest in doing a PhD, but ultimately I think I was not really ready for that at that moment, and I decided to work in a company. So this is, let's say, an unusual path if you want to have an academic career, but I think it really helped me. Also, when I was doing my PhD, I started a family with 2 small kids, and this is also, let's say, not always ideal or how things are done, but I think everything is possible. And yeah, for me, it meant that it was not very easy to have international experience because I always needed to stay at home a lot. But yeah, I mean, and whereas a lot of people were telling me like, oh, you can only have an academic career if you have international experience, and you need to go to the US, you need to go to Asia, or I mean, there are all these let's say rules, but they don't really apply always. So don't let them stop you, and don't be afraid to do something unusual. So I hope that some of you will join me later in the breakout room. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Gerbrand, for that. And now we will continue with Marisol. Just to remind you that we will have Q&A, we'll have a panel discussion and then breakout rooms, but you can leave your questions in the chat for the panel discussion. So, Gerbrand, if you want to stop sharing, I think Marisol, you can start sharing whenever you're ready.
Yes.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay. 1 second then. Okay. Are you seeing my presentation?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, perfect. So thank you very much for the opportunity to talk about how to write a CV. So I would say that everything I put in the presentation comes from my experience preparing my CV to look for different positions when I wanted to do a postdoc experience outside Argentina. So I hope you find it also useful. And the idea is I will also scroll very, very quickly through some templates, but we can discuss in detail those templates in the breakout group. So some tips before moving to the examples. I think this slide is the most important for me if you want to have some take-home messages. So for me, the most important tip is always to tailor your CV to each position you're applying for, not only because you better highlight the accomplished relevance for that position, but also sometimes, depending on the position you're applying, the CV needs to be formatted in a specific way. So it's always important that for each position you are applying for, you will need to prepare a CV for that. So take some time, but at the end, it pays all the effort you put on it. But the idea is that you're not building this CV from scratch. The idea is to keep a master CV in which you update every single award, publication, skill, etc. Anything you think is particular or has added something to your career, it's important to keep it in this master CV. And this master CV is then the one that you're using to build your tailored CV. And in my experience, that also helps me anytime I needed to share some information with colleagues. I always go through my master CV and added that information and share that information with anyone that is interested in some pieces of my experience. And as you do with your password and your toothbrush, or you should do at least, you try to update your master CV every 3 months. That's because sometimes you're very active, you're working a lot, and you just forget the things you've done, the things you achieved. And if you just do this when you are required a new CV, it takes a lot of time to go through all your agenda, your calendar, and everything, and try to make a list of the things you have done in the last, I don't know, 6 months, a year, everything. So it's important that every 3 months you just take 5 minutes to say, okay, what are the things that I've done in the last 3 months? And try to add it to this master CV. So your master CV is always up to date. And this last one is a bit obvious, but just in case, never, never, never lie in your CV. So when we are thinking in academic CV, I would try to show examples also for a professional CV, although I don't have a lot of experience, but I've been talking with colleagues that apply for jobs in industry. Usually for the academic CV, there is no limit of the pages that you can use, although I still recommend it. In my last applications to job, I always try to restrict my CV to 4 to 5 pages, no more than that. And even I would say that 5 is still a lot. And mostly when we are thinking in a CV for academia, we're thinking in a list in reverse chronological order of all the dates clearly indicated. So it's important to see when and what you've done. And also academic CV highlights your research teaching mostly, and especially, I mean, it's something significant related to that activity. And you should add that this is a big difference for CVs. For industry, you don't include bullet points when you expand on duties, usually because the target audience is usually people from your discipline or people that are familiar with this type of CV. You don't need to explain a lot what you've done. So quickly going through the different sections that an academic CV can or should include, you first on top always include your name. You mentioned that this is your CV, and you include the contact information. That always goes on top because we want people to reach us out. Then you always include your current position. That's the first one you mentioned. And then you always go, this depends on the order, but I prefer going first to the education. Then your academic employment, which always include your positions after you get your highest degree. So for instance, if you're finishing your master, you include any employment that you got after your master. But if you have completed a PhD, every postdoc that you got after your PhD goes in this academic employment section. And then you include the list of publications that can be journals, proceedings, subchapters, other publications that may be relevant. And you can also include at the end the publications that are under review. Then you can include your invited talks, the conference participations, your teaching experience, and your research experience. And in which research experience, you don't include your previous positions, but you include the research topics that you've been working on, just to give some details on your expertise. Then you can include awards and honors. Sometimes, depending if it's a very significant award, you can put that on top of your CV because it's something that you would like to highlight. But usually, for instance, if it's a prize that you get in a conference, It's not really important to put it on top, but it's important to mention. And of course, it's the same with grants and fellowships. If you also got a very important grant, it's important to highlight it on top. Otherwise, you can include it further down. And then it's important to include the service, the community service, the activities you've done, society members. If you are part of ES, that's very important. You include it here. If you have reviewed some manuscripts for some journals. And there are some optional categories that include the languages you know, your other research interests, some skills that you got during your education. And also you can include some participation in the media if you think it's important. So, but basically, if we go through the format, and I will quickly display this video that scroll in a CV, it's nothing very specific or particular about the format and specific about the layout that we need to use. Actually, for academia, usually sometimes it's the more the better. It's important just to have a good font type. So try to avoid Comic Sans or those fonts that look funny and maybe are more suitable for presentations, but are not suitable for a CV. How can I stop this? Okay, here. And if as me, you prefer a short version of your CV, something that it's less than 5 pages long, instead of listing all your publications, you can do something like this. Just include one line in which you say, okay, since this year, I've just published this number of articles in peer-reviewed journals. And you can also refer to, for instance, your ORCID number, your ResearchGate profile, or any other network or platform that register all your publications. Another thing you can do is also include the articles that you have submitted. And another way to do is just pick the 5 most relevant publications since you started publishing. And then you just refer to your profile in any of these platforms for further details. You can also summarize your presentations in conference instead of listing all of them, especially if you have done a lot of conferences. You can just say, okay, I have presented more than X works in local, regional, international conferences. Some of them were posters, some of them were presentations. This is important because it allows the evaluator or the people that are looking at your CV just to have a snapshot of your recent activity as a researcher. And also you can summarize your community service. Maybe instead of listing all the journals that you have a review for, you can say, okay, I have made, for instance, 10 revisions to this journal. I have co-organized conferences. I'm also being a YES member, a member of the YES executive community for X years. I made visit to this or that lab. So that's a way to make it shorter. And you only highlight separately the outstanding activities. So briefly, actually, I think I included my own CV, a short CV here as an example in this video, but we can go through it in more details in the breakout room. I have no problem. And actually see there that I just include one list in my journals and try to make it very short. It's actually a 4-page CV. So I only listed some relevant activities, but then I try to summarize everything. But of course, yes, it's highlighted, and actually, as Gerbrand and Shipra said, that helped me a lot in looking for a new position. And finally, I don't know how it's going. When we are going for a professional CV or resume, in this case, for industry, we are just thinking in a 2-page long CV, no more than that. So you only select the very, very relevant information and you display it in a very, very concise manner. Think that usually industry are interested in your skills. So you have to put emphasis in what were the skills that you gained throughout your career and in your experience. And try to tailor those skills depending on the position you're applying for. most of these professional CV also has a paragraph on top that highlights the profile of the candidate. Because usually I think that the recruiter always do not have a lot of time. So we need to get in just one sentence, what's the type of candidate he will get or he or she will get when reading the CV. So it's important to try to summarize as much as you can and in the best way you can, your main characteristics and what's make you a good candidate for the position. So usually in this type of CV, you just include this information. Think that you only have 2 pages for this. So you include first your skills, because that's what industry is looking for. You look at your past employment, because that helps them to understand where and what type of industry or company you've been working before. And you also include the duties and your achievements there. Then you have actually a detail with all the skills that you have. This could be technical skills, programming languages, but also languages itself and interpersonal skills. Then you include your education. Then you may include some other things that maybe you think that add something to your profile. And finally, you include at least the contact of 2 referees if possible, because usually recruiters will like to have reference about your performance in past jobs. So very quickly in this video, you will see this is a 2-page CV that includes the key skills, the previous employment, the skill profile, the education, then other information that could be relevant, and of course the section for referees. So you actually are really summarizing all your career in 2 pages. It's really challenging, but actually I like you, even if you're not interested in applying for a job in industry, to take the chance to do it, because it's an interesting exercise to see how much can you be concise about your past career, because that also then helps you when you want to introduce yourself to others in a very short talk or maybe in a round table. So I think that I have just a couple of tips for the end. See, my skill is not dealing with Google Slides, sorry. So final tips. Try to pay attention to the style and the organization, looking in particular for typos and trying to use appropriate fonts. Especially for industry, the target audience is not always an expert, so try to avoid the jargon, or if you need to use it, try to explain it. But you have only 2 pages, so it's really challenging. And as I say all the time in the presentation, the target audience is also someone with little time. So really, you need to highlight 2 skills and achievements on top of anything else. And I leave some resources when I took some of the examples, but I'm happy to talk about it later in the breakout group. And that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Marisol. That was great. So we'll just jump to Faten's presentation. So whenever you want to present, or let me know if you need me to present.
Okay, thank you very much, Julia. Thank you, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to talk today for this webinar. Actually, coming after a few nice presentations is very relevant also to share something of the power of how can you use our IT skills and this social media to promote and also to make use of all these mentioned skills in order to promote our profile. Let me share my screen. Okay. So do you see my screen?
We see your screen and now it's in presentation.
Okay, perfect. So thank you very much. Yeah, actually also before moving to talk about this power of social media, so networking and background, I also would like to share something about my own experience. And this is also what was my inspiration to really took this path and also consider to talk about it during this webinar. Actually, we are living, in a world where the landscape is always very much changing. So And also mainly for early career scientists, we are always, subject to this change. And sometimes things are not going very easy. So, and we're always like kind of transiting from job to job, looking for new opportunities, going for master, going for PhD, finishing PhD. We need to find postdoc until getting established and try to build this kind of career. So this is, as an ECR, this is also one of our main challenges in life, And I also want to share some experience I had, like maybe over the last 3 years. Like after finishing my PhD, I was in Germany for 2 years as a postdoc at the university, and then like the COVID happened, so it was very difficult for me to stay there. I wanted to go back home because everything is closed, lockdown, and I needed kind of family time, and like friends time, and so on. But at that time, when transiting your job and being back, and then everything is kind of very restricted. So then, and also we are looking for a new opportunity and a new way to find this kind of job that you really want to have. So it comes a little bit challenging with all this. But also during that time, I discovered the power of social media, because maybe in the previous years, I didn't have that much time to spend a lot of time in looking how can we use those tools in order to empower ourselves and to create some opportunities to ourselves. So here, for example, I'm taking some screenshots, from, for example, one forum discussion at ResearchGate, like when you can post questions about your research, and then you can get a lot of interaction. And sometimes those interaction can even turn into friendship. Yeah, and honestly, I experienced this when I was doing my PhD. Sometimes when you see like there is something that is needed for your profile to really, get updated to what is happening, so then we can see into the resources. So that's why I wanted to refer to my own experience, and from that, I just came with a couple of tips that I wanted to really start with. So first, it's very important to have an overview and a mapping on your social media, I know exactly which social media for what, For example, you can find social media which are more relevant for professional experience, where, for example, you can find a lot of job applications and so on. For example, Shipra mentioned something about Twitter, about LinkedIn. I also can mention something about that. There is also social media where you can reach out to your friends and have their profile of daily life. So this is also very important. And so there is some social media for us as a scientist and a researcher that could be very important and very powerful to take care of. So before moving to the tips, I also would like to say a few words on the way how do we organize our social media and how it is important to organize our social media. Because your social media is kind of reflecting your online life, And usually for someone who do not know you, it's very important when he mentions your name on one of the, for example, Google or Mozilla research tools, they find the clear profile, and they know exactly who are you, what you are doing, what's your university, what's your expertise, what is your background. So then, like the connection, the communication can get very easy. So that's why it's very important, like you have a very clear and informative portfolio or CV that you can put online. For example, if you see the sections of LinkedIn, you can always, for example, find a small bio about yourself. This bio should be 1 or 2 paragraphs. That should not be, like explicit as your CV should be. Just my colleague Marisol mentioned some tips about the CV, and she also showed some example of this. But here you need to highlight your main skills and strengths, and this is very important. Because this will help people who would like to connect to you to really know who you are. So this is very important to start and to organize yourself. And so this is for me was quite very useful, because the time when I wanted to build my own online profile, I was like even discovering what kind of skills I have to promote for myself, because maybe previously I didn't have the chance to ask this to myself because I was quite busy with some work, some stuff, sometimes, I find the time to update my CV, but sometimes I do not find this time. But at some point when you are having your online life, so it is interesting also to take some time to reflect on your strengths, what you would like to show, what are you exactly looking for, and what's relevant for you. So that's why I really give my first advice on really try to build your own CV or portfolio on your social media. You can use, for example, ResearchGate. I also recommend this for scientists because it has been a very great platform. LinkedIn, Twitter. There are several, like this kind of social media platform that you can use for this. You have also to update your ORCID if you have, like publication, if you did some review, if you did some of this work, because this is, in addition to your CV, this is also something that can give a good impression about you to all those people who are offering jobs. And of course, if you are looking for an opportunity, you are like switching from job, like moving from one context to another, and also that was something that I did a lot when I was back, and also just getting my final degree of PhD, and I wanted to try something else. So I spent a lot of time, like looking into all those job opportunities. And the good thing there that sometimes, it is very easy to share your CV, because they always just some button you can click and you can upload your CV. And like most likely I got also sometimes some questions and some interviews from some people and some discussions and so on. So I mean, sometimes you do not really know the person to whom you are dealing with. And that was, for example, the case that Shipra mentioned, when you know people, when you also meet people and then reach out to them. So this is like something that you can use from your network, and here we can have some slot to talk about this. But also if you don't know people and also you're looking for something new, if you have this good profile online, so then it helps a lot to get a response from them, so you can show them that you are someone that they can, like consider for their job application. Also, there is something very important, and that you need always to have a look at your privacy setting. And here I would advise to have like two kind of profiles, because on social media it's always about your daily life. Sometimes you want to share something for fun, sometimes you want to make jokes to friends and so on. So here you can always have your personal account. But if you would like to, because sometimes, some of the applications, they always ask you to add a link about your profile. So if you add this link to your profile, it needs to be professional enough, so to impress the employer, So here, when you talk about the setting or what kind of profile you need to have, you need to have two. I usually, for example, my Facebook, I have two accounts. One which is kind of more public, more related research information shared there, and one is very personal for family, for friends, with very, like limited list of friends where we can, share and do things together. So this is also something that I would like to share as an experience. And yeah, and definitely there is another aspect which was very important to me, is engage in all those social media debates and discussion. I can share one experience from my PhD. When I started working on my PhD, it was on renewable, and in our lab, it was a new axe for research. So I didn't have a lot of connections and people with whom I can exchange on ideas and also work and join it, publication and things together. So my inspiration source was LinkedIn. At the time, my professor kind of advised me to have profile there, and that was for me very new. Like my first year of PhD, I didn't know what does it mean ResearchGate. I'm used to other social media like Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, but that was for me something very new. So I added my profile, and then I tried to see in my field of renewables who is working in some similar thematic. And by chance, I got connected to some group and some people, and always when you ask questions, you engage in discussion, post a question, you can get a lot of people who come there to interact. Sometimes you feel like there is something missed in your profile, maybe some of the skills that you do not have already, and you need to have, for example, more lectures on some specific tool or thing. So you can always find people to support and help. So for me, that was something very important. And I can also say something too, you know, like the first invitation letter I got to visit one of the university in France that was arranged via ResearchGate with one of the researchers that I met by chance, you know. But we had great time discussing things, debating things, sharing our, you know, like experiences in the field. And when we found like there is some close interest and what I'm doing is very relevant to his group, so then we arranged that I go there for a small research stay and visit. So I mean, like this is an aspect that we should not ignore. This is very important. And starting from a level that you do not have already any connection that you know from the beginning. So this is also something that we can leverage on. So I mean, this is also something that had a particular impact on my profile and on my research.
Sorry, Faten, in the interest of time, 2 minutes.
Okay.
How? Yeah.
Yeah, I'll be done in 2 minutes. Thank you very much, Julia. Yeah, and of course, if we are working in some field of science and then you'd like to get connected to some group and also to some scientists, so it's important also to post something about your work and to structure this. For example, if you have relevant article, try to update, for example, your LinkedIn, your ResearchGate with your new articles, the date, the topic, provide some small abstracts and so on. And this is helping so much, you know, in following up and also in connecting to people and also in building even the new partnerships and collaboration. And yeah, this is also will help you also to keep an eye of what is happening as news and also to share those news. And sometimes, you know, like when commenting to the news and having and be part of some of those groups, this is also a great opportunity to meet people and to talk to them. So yeah, there is a lot to say about the power of social media, but due to the time, and then we can also discuss during the breakout rooms, so then we can have more time to talk about it. And now just, you know, all the networking, and this is an aspect that it was mentioned in all the presentation of my colleagues. And this is something very important, you know, because also we need to build on our network and also we need to provide ourselves with this networking opportunities. And here there is, you know, opportunities to consider the platforms of networking, communities, seminars, conferences, online, on site. And also we have this opportunity to have a lot of things online. So this is some strength that we are getting with this, I mean, like digital transition that we are facing those days. And just mentioned also by my colleagues that I want to echo that those networking opportunities will provide us with the great references. So then some of the application, always you need to mention some or two names of people who know you, who know your work to promote your application. Also to get updated about the opportunities of job, and this is some aspect that my colleague Shipra just mentioned, to have a group discussion on the different topics and interest, improve your communication. And this is a very important aspect that my colleague Gerbrand just mentioned in his talk, and definitely to find interest shared with others. Yeah, I don't have a lot of time to take you to the platform of Yes Community, because now we are here also to talk to Yes Community and also refer to the Yes Community as a platform of opportunity. And I'm sure that we are all part of it, but not all of us are always seeking into resources that Yes is provided. So if you have a look there and very quick search, you will find like there is a list of job lists, a list of online resources that we developed during the COVID, a list of conferences and workshops where you can find people, you find your interest, and also you can even connect to the community there, and definitely also a list of courses and schools, because I mean, like sometimes online is not only for job sake, but also to build your profile for it. And with this, I come to the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for attention, and I look forward to interacting with you for the breakout rooms.
Okay, thank you very much, Faten. So we will have one short question for our panel discussion, because we were interested in having you discussing, but we won't extend it too long, and then we will go to the breakout rooms. So before going to the breakout rooms, there was one question posted by the attendees when they applied to the webinar that we wanted to bring to you. So there's a question saying, or manifesting interest in how to get a permanent position and maintain research-life balance with personal life in this difficult phase of, I guess they're referring to this period where you are. So perhaps what we can do is have a brief answer to this question from each of you, just to cover this question, and then we will go to the breakout rooms. Whoever wants to start, perhaps we can go in order. Okay, Marisol, great.
I can start. I'm not very good at keeping a balance, but the best moments when I achieved that were when I could organize my day, trying to say, okay, my working hours are this, and today I'm going to do this, and try to make a list of the things that I wanted to do, and try to think, okay, if I can complete the whole list, it doesn't matter. I just leave the remaining topics for the next day, trying to adjust day after day the objectives that I trying to achieve, and try to lower my expectations of what can I do one day. So that's, I guess, my advice.
Great, thank you. I'm then just going to mention to give you the floor. Shipra?
Okay, so for the work-life balance, I can quickly think of two things. So I usually leave my laptop in office on Friday. I don't bring my laptop home on weekends. And so we had a meeting today, so I brought my laptop, but on weekdays, at least 3 days, I still leave my laptop in the office. So if I don't have laptop, I don't have any tendency to look at my email or do stuff. And the second thing that I do to organize my day, I cut down heavily on meetings. Or like something where I don't have any insight to share or contribute to the discussions. So I shamelessly say no to such meetings. So initially it was a bit hard for, I think, my colleagues, but now I think once you establish that culture that maybe you're not actually needed in that meeting, people start accepting that fact, and it's working out quite well. I also use my Outlook calendar to block time. Let's say if I want to do research for 4 hours, I would actually block that time in my official calendar, so nobody can send me a meeting invite in that time. And I would mention something like research. So I actually organize my day using the calendar. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Gerbrand?
Yes, so I think keeping a good balance is a constant challenge, to be honest, for me at least. So I'm not sure if I can really give a good answer how you should do it, because I try to figure this out myself. But one thing I do know, what works well for me, it's a little bit similar to what Shipra said, is well, she said not bringing a laptop. What I do is closing down my email sometimes, because I notice that if my email is open, I get these pop-ups like, oh, new message, and it constantly, then I'm curious and I open it and I read it and I think like, oh, okay, I should do something. So it's constantly, you're then constantly doing things that other people want you to do, rather than focusing on a task that you have set for yourself. So for me, it helps to close down my email and work on something I find important.
Okay, and we close with Faten. Comment on this?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. And actually, this is a very good question. And what I would like to mention here, that we need to be nice to ourselves, Sometimes we deserve this break, you deserve this ice cream, you deserve some time with family and friends. So what I always try to do is, mainly during the weekend, try to not really respond or to do any of the work. Sometimes it is urgent that I do a few things. But what I do for the beginning of my week, I usually have a list of to-do list. And my to-do list is like having two main parts, one super urgent and one thing that can wait. So I usually try with dealing with the super urgent things because though they need some energy and some time. But then when you start, to have this, like other task, and then, I mean, like for me, it was always fine. Like with this, I was always organized to accomplish all my tasks within Friday, honestly, So if you are kind of put in a list and then try to stick to some deadline that you give to yourself and to work to respect your deadline yourself. So I think this is some approach that was quite successful for me.
Great. So thank you. I guess it would be super interesting to continue with a ping pong of comments like this, but I think it would be nice to have enough time for the breakout rooms. So Valentina will now make 2 breakout rooms, and there will be 2 speakers in each room, and all of the attendees will be assigned to a room. The attendees can change. So if you're interested in the other one, I understand that you can do that, but then we will, after a few minutes, we will change the speakers. So you can stay in a room and talk to everyone, or you can jump if you have to leave and want to talk or make a specific question. In any case, I will very quickly share my screen just to say, so ideally we would like to have 30 minutes. We will see if we have enough time, but just go to the room that you're assigned. And for the questions, we will please ask you to do an at the person who you want to ask the question to, so that, because there will be 2 speakers in the room, so refer to who you're asking, and then make your question in the chat box and they will answer back or ask you to open the microphone if they need to.